Hi everyone, my name is Judong Zhang. This time our teammate project is to design a novel arcade machine which draws inspiration from pinball and plinko, and it provides players with a variety of methods to pass the ball to plinko nails, which brings an interesting experience. We faced many problems in the design process, but through the teammates' cooperation, these problems have been solved one by one.
So with this, we ended up going through two design cycles. Our first one was mainly focused on the brainstorming, modeling, and prototyping. And we eventually found some issues with the constraints, mainly dealing with size. So in our second design cycle, we fixed the dimensions. We changed one of our power sources for practicality reasons and added some aesthetic changes and rendered the final product.
Defining the problem. So we had to ask ourselves a couple of questions before we started. So one of the first ones we asked was, what makes a fun arcade game? And what are our criterias? What are our constraints? And how do we implement four physics properties? So these are some of our criteria. Here's our criteria. It's to create a fun arcade game with four physics properties. And our constraints were in size and time. We had to keep a 2 by 3 by 3. And we had a date of April 23rd, 2021 to get it finished.
So going more into meeting the criteria, we also had to have four power sources. We ended up going with the pusher, a plunger, a gate, which was used in order to calculate the person's score, and gravity. Two of those being skill based, the pusher and plunger, with the criteria stating that you needed one.
So for scoring, our machine works much like Pinko, where the ball falls through some pegs, and wherever it ends up landing, you can add your score by the number value for each pocket, and calculate your score by adding those numbers. And then you must release the ball by flipping the gate to reset the game.
Next, we'll cover our first cycle of the design cycle. So, like I said earlier, we focused on the planning and brainstorming during this cycle. Our main goal was kind of to make it similar to the average arcade machine with a plunger. And then we also added a pusher as the other skill based mechanic. And then to make it different, we wanted to make it similar to Plinko. We added the pegs and the scoring system, much like Plinko.
So in this stage, we built our skeleton design, and we had not paid close enough attention to the constraints on size. And so this ended up being significantly larger than what we were allowed in terms of height, and that will come back to bite us.
For this stage, we pretty much added the in play area. So first we added this includes the power source of the force of gravity as it's on an angled plane. We also added a pusher onto it, which will is a skill-based mechanic that will push the ball into a different angle.
Right, next, we'll cover our second cycle through the design cycle.
So at this point, we looked into cutting things down size-wise, as well as we decided that the flipper wasn't going to work as a power source. So we instead changed it to the ball gate, which also solved our scoring problem, where the ball would fall through the pockets instead of staying there and allowing you to calculate the score. This way, the player just flips the gate when they need to release the balls after calculating their scores. We also shaved down the top and cut off the legs, and this got us basically within size constraints with a few other adjustments.
So in this stage, we pretty much added the gate into our design and our prototype. The gate can be manually released by a knob on the side to release the ball down into the ball shooter area again. And then we also added the plunger or the ball shooter into this design. To load up the spring, you would just need to pull the knob on the outside of the design, and it will launch the ball into the play area.
So here's our final product. As you can see on the right side of the play area, there's a small chute. That's where the ball sits. And after you pull the plunger back, it'll send it into play, where the player can either preset the pusher or actively try to hit the ball with the pusher during play, thus making the ball fall onto the pegs and eventually into one of those pockets at the bottom. You can also see a little red knob on the left where you would twist the gate, allowing the ball to be reset to play the game again. We ended up using wood and aluminum as our materials, as weight was a significant issue in terms of moving the pusher. We were worried about it being too heavy, as well as we wanted it to be durable enough to maintain impacts from repeated use.
Next, this is our final timeline of all of the iterations through the design cycles. And then lastly, I'll cover the dimensions. As stated before, the constraints required a 2 by 3 by 3 feet arcade machine, and we met those.
So with questions we had were, how did our project fare at first year engineering design day? So our project fared pretty well, even though we didn't place. We were given high remarks in both professionalism, organization, and our presentation. They did mention that we did have a great final design. What would we do differently if we had to start over? One thing we would have done differently is looked over the constraints more, because we ran into issues by making it too large. And for future students, we would definitely recommend that you read all the instructions, all the constraints and criteria before you begin. Also, another advice for next year students, we would suggest you looking at other softwares along with Fusion 360 to create a simulation that will create a more streamlined and more give the FED project more of a simulation that will allow them to see how your design actually processes and works.